Hey there, everybody. So, this is Prospector Jess, sourdoughminer.com, huntingforgold.com. Come check out the sites and sign up for the newsletter. Also, check out Prospector Jess over on YouTube and look at liking or following the page on Facebook, Hunting FOR Gold, Hunting for Gold. So, tonight's topic is just an extension of last night's. There was a couple things I remembered last night that I had forgotten to tell you about water and speed, specifically about velocity profiles and the effects of boundary conditions. Fancy word for the effect of having the water have a channel. And so I thought I'd go over that tonight, and I have a special tip that was given to me, reminded of by Wayne Nugget Brain Peterson. Thanks a lot for Wayne's input. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it relates to this business of watching water flow, and a little tip on how you can easily kind of get a feel for the water flow yourself. And I'll give you a few caveats to that tip as well. It's a commonly practiced thing amongst experienced miners, but it has a flaw. So we'll talk about that a bit. And that's kind of what we're going to go into tonight. Let me check on you guys and make sure we've got our audio going. Check Mr. Murphy, make sure he's in his trap for the night. Says live now, but it's having a little trouble. There we go. And hi, Michael. He's on. We got a handful of others. We got 5 comments already. Charles is here. Hi, Charles. Talked to you earlier today. CJ, hello and good evening from Kansas. And Byron Brown's checking in. Charles says the sound is good, so we're going for it. Okay, tonight is part 2 of placer gold and water speed, and kind of an understanding of water speed and the flow effect it has on gold and moving placer gold into gold concentrations and traps. So let's move forward. I'm going to go right to the blackboard if you don't mind. We got to make this one kind of short and sweet, and I just want to kind of hit it off right off the bat. So open flow channel enters. We'll just keep it real simple because it gets kind of hard to draw otherwise. And so as we go in here, what happens is there's a concept called a boundary condition or a boundary flow. Specifically, it's the bounding condition that the velocity must be equal to 0 on the surface of some kind of a thing like a channel, because the water can't flow through the walls of the channel. So what happens is the drag on the edge of those walls causes the little tiny molecular level interactions that happen on the surface to slow the water down. So if we drew what we were drawing, which was, remember we had arrows yesterday for the length of this equals the speed of the flow. And across this front here, we'll just say they're all going the same speed. So what ends up happening is, as it comes in contact with these edges when they neck down, the speed starts to slow down even more. And so we end up with something that looks like this. See if I can get this to draw right. Yeah, we'll keep trying. So on the edges. Now, what happens here is, okay, if we drew a line kind of showing the boundary of this thing, it would look like this, kind of like a drum head, kind of square in the middle and angle to 0 speed on the edges, where speed is equal to the length of these arrows. Okay, now if we come down further, the flow effect, developing full flow, the maximum speed is going to be in the center of the channel. Now this presumes there's no other obstacles acting as boundaries or impingements and no other interfering flows coming in. But what it means is essentially that this thing looks more like a parabola, kind of like your standard parabolic curve, Gaussian curve. And so if we drew our velocity profile, it looks more like this. And so why is that of interest to you? Well, 2 things. One is as your creek widens and narrows, the flow velocities can increase or decrease based on just simply those changes in the creek width and depth. This also takes place vertically as well. So you can easily see how if we have, this kind of a creek versus something that does this and maybe kind of and does something weird where, maybe there's a waterfall over here or something in a big old opening. Now all of a sudden, how do I know what the speed is here? What in the world is a miner to do? Okay? And that's what today's tip comes in. So let's say we have this flow, and I'm going to draw a big long red line kind of showing you what the flow does, quote, naturally. And that is, it might go in here and swirl around a little bit, and then it might come over here and swirl again, and then it's going to go over here and kind of curve backwards around in this pool, and eventually work its way out here. See all those curlicues and stuff? Well, now this flow is too complicated for us mathematicians and scholastic types, you know, engineers and theoreticians, to really, you know, show you without a supercomputer what it really is going on. But there is a trick, okay? And here comes the trick. I'm going to show it to you right now. The trick is that if you go into an area that has, let's say, some kind of crazy flow, I'm not going to do it too crazy, but let's say I wanted to know where in this creek at the current flow level, now that's the caveat, would gold likely be pushed? Well, it's going to be pushed, remember we talked about it yesterday, at the point where there's the maximum velocity. That's what's pushing the gold along, is the speed of the water. How do I know where the speed is and where the fastest spot is? Well, there's an old miner's trick. You can take a tennis ball, you know, sometimes what we do for hydropower is you take an orange, but you take something that is essentially kind of neutrally buoyant. Well, how you do that with a tennis ball or with a fishing float is you basically put the float on a line, piece of mylar or monofilament, put a fish weight on the bottom that goes, you know, basically right near the bottom, if not dragging along the bottom, but enough line that you kind of give some drag to help pull it, so it doesn't get caught in the rocks and stuff. The idea is it just wants to be near the bottom. It doesn't really want to be on it. And then what you're going to do is you're going to watch this buoy. So this is a fishing boat, and you're going to track its position as it flows downstream through all these angles and turns and stuff. And the old miner saying is you just track that and that's your pay streak. Well, kinda, because it's going to be dragged into a regime where there's the fastest velocity flow, because that's what can push that piece of lead or a piece of, you know, if you use a sandbag on an end with a baggie, you know, hanging down in here instead of a piece of lead on this end right here, it will tend to follow that flow. Now, there's a couple problems with this model, but it's an interesting model nonetheless. So we'll just go over what's good about it. What's good about it is it's actually finding naturally what it takes a supercomputer to find otherwise, and that is, where is the flow velocity profile where there's like this maximum speed track? Well, that's what this will naturally fall into. And that has to do with the way flows work. It's going to kind of suck it downstream. And if you kind of keep track of it, you know, take a videotape and watch where this ball goes, you know, your float, it's going to be above this roughly by however many feet. And typically tracking slightly behind, because the other piece is going to get tugged down, but it depends on the velocity at the top and the bottom. So there's some funniness here, because the bottom again is following that same property where, because there's a boundary on the bottom of the stream, it's slower at the bottom than it is. The fastest part of a stream is actually at the top in the center of the channel. So what's going to happen is that buoy will tend to flow a little ahead, but kind of follow the path, because it'll be held in position by that weight. And the weight will be the thing that sort of acts like a nugget. It's going to get dragged along by the heavier flows that you can't see. Now what's happening is, if I mark this, you know, and we did, we'll change the color again. So I'm going to mark it yellow for my gold pay streak. So if I had marked this, now I have a picture of where the gold may be if the flow regime, and here's the caveat, in a peak flow follows this same channel. There's where the real problem comes in, because if in flood flow this channel widens up and kind of looks more like this, then this will give me a hint because it is the deepest spot in that bigger channel. But there may be obstructions in here that totally wipe out. You may have a boulder over here that it's flowing around that causes the flow to split and jet across here and jet across here, and that, you know, all bets are off. Time out. Because now our supercomputer says something very different from what we predicted with our little float. So just know that there's a caveat, that the float is working in a lower flow regime and doesn't give you the answer for high flow, but it does give you a hint. It tells you the boundary conditions when the flow is moving down this purpley pink channel. It doesn't tell you what happens when the blue channel comes into effect in a flood, and that's when the most gold is moving. So just be aware of that if you're using this technique. It does work, and so you ought to try it. It's kind of fun, but that's just a tip for tonight. Wayne mentioned it in the context of last night's show on placer gold and high-speed water flow. It also will help you find boils and any kind of whirlpools that are forming down in here that you might not be aware of, because you'll see this ball come down and all of a sudden it'll turn around and do a curlicue right in the middle of the stream, and you go, that's an interesting place that might form a trap, because it's actually an eddy in the center of the stream that I never even saw without my little spherical indicator. So that's a tip for tonight. I just thought I'd drop that one in into the flow, so to speak. Is this going okay? Good evening from Kansas, says CJ Walker. Byron Brown's checking in. Douglas Town, hello from Berlin, New Hampshire. Good to see you. I hope you check out the New Hampshire video. It was just posted. Tyson Allison, sucks I find any gold in New York State. I have to hand it over to the government. Well, I'm not going to tell you not to, but the reality is that's a law that's kind of questionable as to exactly how much enforcement it gets. There's a ton of laws on the books that are called blue laws, and that's kind of one of them, where they were put in place long ago and far away by a very different set of moral and legal compounds and constraints. For example, that was initiated by the King of England. He hasn't been in charge of the U.S. for a while. So, and I've heard of people going prospecting in New York State at a small scale, panning and that kind of thing, and state troopers come by and ask them whether they got anything yet. So clearly it's not a well understood law. I know a lot of people tout it, but it's something worthy of asking around before you throw in the towel. Yeah. Josh says, come to California instead. Right. Except the cost of living and taxes and politics. Let's see. Charles says, how about how much weight to use? Well, that's a tricky question because it depends on your flow. If your flow is light, think of it like fly fishing or fishing, okay? You want it to go to the bottom and not get stuck. So if you're fishing in a river that's moving fast, moving swift, you're going to need some pretty heavy weight. If you're in a creek that's just barely moving along, you're going to want to put just a little lightweight, 1/4 ounce or less sinker, maybe an 1/8 ounce, something like you'd have on a ultralight spinning system. The whole purpose is that you want it down there just barely bouncing along on the boulders and cobbles on the bottom and not getting wedged inside of something or simply sitting on the bottom and getting stuck. The objective is it wants to flow with the water that will push it. So that's the answer, Charles. It varies. And that's about it. Let's see how we're doing right now. We got 18 followers viewing, and we've got a variety of things going on. We're about 15 minutes into it. So are there any questions really quick? And then we close out the night. My wonderful art showing up here on the page, this great thing that looks something like a Picasso. I was going to show you this one too. Let me bring your attention to 2020 prospecting, as we always talk about. That's that report that talks about water flow and how it moves gold. This particular water flow happened a couple years back when the Oroville Dam began to fail along its overflow. And it gives you a definite impression of just how much water and how flow can move that much material. I mean, if you look, this is a highway-sized, road going past and over the dam, and it basically got washed downstream and nothing flat. But what's more interesting is it's chewing into bedrock here. This is greenstone, which is kind of weak bedrock, but it's tearing into it and tearing into all these red silts and soils downstream, and by the way, knocking a lot of gold downstream. That I heard from other people who were both there and further downstream, and some of the guys who were doing the construction who had to be told to stop picking up the gold and get to work. So, but you get an idea, if you dropped one of those little bubbles in here and you let it flow, it would tend to rip through these rapids and kind of get thrown all over the place, and then it would kind of swing to another side, and then it would kind of swing around and kind of go down here. And what you want to do is kind of see what path is it taking. Now, in this flow, this is what we call turbulent flow. It's a crapshoot. Turbulence is a funny property of kind of statistical phenomena where it goes from being what they call nice laminar and linear flow. It flows in nice lines to broken and curlicues, and some places are tighter curlicues than others, and so you get into this whole situation that creates all these frothy messes down here, and the water doesn't flow the same predictable regime. It flows in a statistically predictable regime, which is a different animal entirely. In other words, you can't tell what any particle of gold or any particle of water will be, but statistically you can tell where they will likely be. And that's the whole principle behind kind of what we're teaching in the 5 stages, is understand the principles of where things are likely to be, and you increase your odds greatly. If you try to track a bobber through this rapid, forget it. But you might want to, just for fun, because it would give you a feeling for just what's going to happen if a piece of gold moved down through this. And there might be some place down, like in this area here, or right around this bend where, see, it's forming a little boil hole down here. It might start pooling and circulating down there, and you might see that going in it's clean, and coming out it's red and muddy. Well, if it's red and muddy, it's tearing up the bedrock and the stuff with overburden on it. It might also be replacing that with gold that concentrates at that point. So keep that in mind when you're looking at this kind of turbulence. You're looking for that kind of situation where, oh, the water's tearing the bottom up, but that means the gold is going to get concentrated in lieu of all that mud and silt that was there. And so what will end up in the end is a gravel pit with boulders and gravel and gold underneath. That's the thing you're thinking. Okay, and so I just wanted to pop that one in real quick. Let's take a look if there are any questions real quick. Hi from the Mother Lode of Sonora, California, says Ty Day. Have had plenty of rain in the year to move gold. I'll bet you have. I noticed that with, I saw some video from, was it Payless? Looked like it, I don't think it went through the store, but it certainly didn't allow anybody into the store with, you know, the water just rushing right through the parking lot. Wonder where all those grocery carts went. Probably down the stream in the creek. So, yeah, it was a wave of water. So Bob Sheasley says, interesting. I will try that at high water sometime. Give it a try. And let's see. Danny Young says, late again, I'm studying this. Water flow. And so that's the idea for tonight, is looking at this high-speed water flow condition. Again, like I said, we cover that in the 2020 report. Check out that link below if you're interested in learning more about this. But placer gold and water flow all tie together and leads you to where the gold will hide and hang out. And I think that's it for tonight. We'll call it a night. Prospector Jess, over and out. See you tomorrow night for another prospecting adventure. I hope you're enjoying these things. It's kind of fun. Every once in a while I think I'm running out of stuff to say, and then somebody asks a question or brings up a point like Wayne did, and I'll send them off on another tangent. Hey, wait a minute, I remember this. So that always helps to have a little input from you guys. So thanks a lot. Put it in the comments below. All right, see you tomorrow night. Good prospecting. Prospector Jess, over and out.